Every year, my family skipped my birthday by accident. This time, I didn't remind them, I just flew out first class with my bonus and hosted myself a luxury dinner. The next morning, my dad texted, "Is this some kind of message?" I landed in Miami wearing the kind of suit that commands respect without demanding attention. The champagne they handed me in first class was still dancing in my veins, and for the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't pretending to be okay. I wasn't managing anyone's expectations. I wasn't being the accommodating one. I was just me alone, 42 years old, and finally celebrating a birthday that no one else remembered on purpose this time. I stepped out of the Uber in shoes I'd never worn before, the ones I'd been saving for something special. And for once, the something special wasn't someone else's baby shower or my sister's third wedding. It was just me, and it was enough. The hotel lobby smelled like orchids and old money, and the woman at the front desk looked at me like she couldn't decide if I was famous or just lucky. Honestly, I didn't care what she thought. I wasn't there to be noticed, not by anyone except myself. It had taken me over 2 decades to stop begging for crumbs from people who didn't even know they were holding the whole damn cake. Every year, it was the same routine. Early March rolls around, and like clockwork, the world keeps spinning while my birthday slips through the cracks of my family's carefully curated chaos. My sister Nina would always post something about her kid's soccer game or some new business venture she was crushing. And my dad Carl would be up to his elbows planning Easter brunch for his golf buddies, acting like that's what made him a good father. Even when I reminded them, and believe me, I used to, the reactions felt more like damage control than celebration. A quick text, maybe a call. One year, they Venmo'd me $50 and called it a party. The last time they forgot, I spent the evening watching TV with a half-eaten grocery store cake and a cheap bottle of whiskey I picked up on the way home from work. My phone stayed quiet most of the night, except for one group text where my brother-in-law, Lance, was organizing a surprise party for his pug's birthday. I wish I was kidding. They bought that dog a damn tiara. I remember sitting there staring at that text and thinking, if I died right now, they'd probably remember me as someone who always made things easy, someone who didn't ask for much, someone who smiled through being forgotten year after year. And that's when the idea started growing. Not a loud vengeful thing, just a quiet thought, like the first drop of rain before a storm you know is coming. What if I didn't remind them? What if I just let it happen and watched what they did or didn't do? And then came the bonus. I work in corporate marketing. Nothing sexy, but enough to live on. And when the company landed a ridiculous deal in Q4, the partners decided to hand out bonuses like it was Oprah's favorite things. Mine was more than I expected, enough to do something bold, not reckless, just unapologetic. I booked the trip that night. Miami, oceanfront suite, first class, spa appointments, a tasting menu at a place where the waiter probably says things like infused foam with a straight face. It wasn't about the money. It was about the message. Not for them, for me. The night before I flew out, I looked at my phone at least 10 times. I kept expecting a ping, a calendar reminder, a mistimed happy early birthday from someone who remembered too soon. Nothing. The silence was so loud it rang in my ears. So I turned it off, zipped my carry-on, and went to bed smiling. I didn't leave a note. I didn't post a hint. I just disappeared for the weekend like some ghost in designer sunglasses. And you know what? It felt like freedom. Not the kind you shout about, the kind that sits in your chest like a calm storm waiting for the people who forgot you to notice the gap you left behind. When I ordered room service that first night, lobster tail, caviar, and something green and expensive looking, I raised my glass not to myself, but to the guy I used to be. The one who used to cry in his car in the Walgreens parking lot because nobody called. The one who baked his own birthday cupcakes so his coworkers wouldn't feel awkward. The one who used to make excuses for his family because they meant well. I toasted him goodbye. He was gone now. And somewhere, back in suburban Illinois, my father was probably folding laundry or watching one of those cooking shows where everything's wholesome and nobody yells. He hadn't texted. Neither had Nina or Lance or my mom, who has barely shown interest in anything since 1998. It was March 12th, 42 years to the day since I came into their world, and not one of them remembered again. But this year, I didn't give them the chance to pretend they did. And here's the thing I keep asking myself, even now, if someone has to be reminded every year that you exist, do they ever really see you at all? Have you ever been forgotten by the people who were supposed to love you most? Did you ever stop reminding them just to see what would happen? Well, I did. And what happened next? It was delicious. When the email with the subject line Q4 bonus breakdown landed in my inbox 2 weeks before my birthday, I opened it without expectation, fully prepared for another underwhelming knot of corporate gratitude, something like a gift card to a steakhouse I'd never visit or a pathetically modest deposit that barely covered a tank of gas. But this time was different. The number I saw made me sit up straighter in my chair, blinking, making sure it wasn't a mistake or a joke or some line item meant for a different James in a different department with a fancier title in a corner office. But, no, it was mine. After 12 years of showing up early, staying late, taking on projects nobody else wanted, smiling through meetings that could have been emails, and keeping my head down while others took the credit, I finally got something real. It wasn't life-changing, but it was enough to shift something inside me, enough to open a door I'd been staring at for years, locked from the outside by guilt, obligation, and the endless tangle of family expectations. And for the first time, I felt like I had the key. I didn't even hesitate. That same night, I poured myself a glass of scotch that had been collecting dust since last Thanksgiving, opened my laptop, and started planning. I wasn't doing another lonely birthday filled with fake smiles and sad leftovers. I was done. I chose Miami not because I had some romanticized vision of palm trees and beach parties, but because it felt like the kind of place where people go to disappear in plain sight, where no one knows your name unless you want them to, and where you can sit by the water with a whiskey and a secret and feel for a moment like your life belongs to you and no one else. The suite I booked wasn't just oceanfront. It was the kind of place where they folded your towels into animals and left chocolates with your name on them at night. The kind of place where the staff called you Mr. Chandler and looked you in the eye like you mattered, which frankly was more than I could say for my own family. I picked out a birthday outfit that cost more than what my parents spent on my last 5 birthdays combined, a tailored blazer that fit like it was made for me and caught the light just enough to feel dangerous, like it knew things I hadn't said out loud. I reserved a table at a rooftop restaurant with a view so breathtaking, I knew it would do the work for me. I didn't even need a caption, just a photo of me alone, confident, alive, holding a glass of aged bourbon, and letting the silence speak for itself. And, oh, it did. I posted that first photo. Just one. Me, smiling faintly, backlit by sunset and city lights, blazer sharp, drink in hand, no tag, no location, just the words, 42 feels different. And then I waited. Not for the comments. They came fast, mostly from coworkers, old friends, the kind of people who always remember even if they're not close. No. I waited for the silence from the ones who should have said something before they saw the post. The ones who always had an excuse, who always played dumb, who always claimed it was just a mix-up. First came the fire emojis from an old roommate, then a damn bro happy birthday from a college ex I hadn't thought about in years. And finally, hours later, after enough time had passed to confirm the gut punch had landed, I got the text from Lance. Wait. Was it your birthday today? I didn't respond. Then came my sister, Nina, who clearly hadn't spoken to her husband that evening. James, happy birthday, bro. Hope it's a good one. I left her on read. Then around midnight, the one I'd been expecting, not hoping for, but expecting because he always needed the last word, my father. His message was short, clipped, almost comical in its lack of awareness. Is this some kind of message? And I stared at that text for a full minute, letting the question soak in, not because I didn't know how to respond, but because I couldn't decide if he genuinely didn't get it or if he was trying to guilt me into pretending he had, as if my absence was the problem, not their neglect, as if I owe them the courtesy of another performance, another round of forgiveness, another year of pretending that being forgotten was no big deal. But it was a message. Every silent minute of that day, every sip of bourbon, every carefully composed image, every ignored text, all of it spoke volumes, not in bitterness, but in clarity. I wasn't trying to make them feel bad. I just stopped trying to make them feel anything at all. It's amazing how fast people notice your worth once you stop handing it out for free. The next morning, I woke up to more messages. Guilt-tinged birthday wishes, overcompensating emojis, a voicemail from my mom awkwardly singing happy birthday in the background of a conversation about gas prices, and a sudden flood of memories I didn't ask for, years of being the afterthought, the backup plan, the sibling who didn't cause trouble but never got the spotlight. And now they were paying attention, not because they remembered, but because I didn't remind them. I sipped my coffee on the balcony, looking out at the horizon, feeling more peaceful than I had in years. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt anymore. I was just done. And sometimes, done is the most powerful feeling in the world. I didn't have to check the family group chat to know what was happening in there. Because if there's one thing that's always been as predictable as their ability to forget me, it's their knack for turning any situation into a crisis that somehow centers around everyone else's feelings. As if my silence was a personal attack, as if my absence was a betrayal rather than a quiet protest built from years of being overlooked, dismissed, and talked over. But eventually, curiosity got the better of me. Not because I was looking for apologies, but because I wanted to see who they would blame first and how fast the narrative would twist itself into something where I was the villain in a story they never even bothered to read. The messages were pouring in like little grenades wrapped in false concern and passive-aggressive confusion. Nina had kicked things off with a seemingly innocent question. Did anyone know it was James's birthday this week? The phrasing already told me everything. Not, hey, we missed James's birthday, but did anyone else screw up, or is this not on me? Classic Nina. Immediately, Lance jumped in with his usual defensive energy. I thought you were going to remind us. You always handle that stuff, which was a flat-out lie. No one ever handled it. And then came Dad, riding in like a martyr on a broken horse. I just assumed he'd say something. He usually does. As if it's normal, expected even, for the birthday guy to send out reminders like a damn party planner begging for RSVPs to his own existence. The thread quickly devolved into the kind of digital bickering that pretends to be about facts but is really about guilt, about shifting it, dodging it, weaponizing it. And there it was again, the glaring absence of anything that resembled genuine remorse. No one said, we forgot him, and that's on us. Instead, it was, he should have said something. He's always been kind of dramatic. And my personal favorite from Lance, who apparently decided subtlety was optional. Honestly, this feels a little manipulative. Manipulative. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, bathrobe still damp from the spa steam room, watching my name bounce around the screen like a character in a soap opera I didn't audition for, wondering how many years I'd spent biting my tongue just to keep the peace in a family that only seemed to notice me when I disrupted their comfort. And I realized in that moment that I wasn't angry, not really, but I was something worse. I was tired, bone tired of being the emotional janitor for people who didn't think twice about tracking their mess into my life and then blaming me for the stains when I finally stopped cleaning. I didn't reply. I didn't defend. I didn't explain. Instead, I took a screenshot, and I sent it to my 2 closest friends, real friends, not people I was born into or legally bound to, the kind of men who remembered my birthday every year without a Facebook reminder, who showed up when I was sick or heartbroken or just too tired to fake being fine, who once drove across the city just to bring me food and watch bad movies when I got dumped via voicemail. Their responses came quickly, and they were exactly what I needed. A mix of righteous fury and hilarious commentary. Lance needs a hobby that isn't throwing shade in group chats, one of them wrote. Tell Nina to go cry into her protein shake. And then the one that made me laugh out loud, your dad should start a support group for emotionally unavailable boomers. But it was what they didn't say that meant more. They didn't ask why I didn't tell anyone. They didn't blame me for going silent. They just got it because they'd seen it all before. They'd seen me show up to birthday dinners that turned into planning meetings for someone else's event. They'd seen me get passed over for toasts, presents, invitations. They'd watched me fake enthusiasm for family photos while quietly shrinking inside. And maybe that's why I started screenshotting more of the chat, not to expose anyone, not to stir drama, but to document the truth, the quiet devastating truth that in this family, love was conditional, and presence was only rewarded when it served a narrative that didn't include my actual feelings. I posted a few of the screenshots selectively and without comment to my private Instagram story, the one only a handful of people followed, the one my family didn't even know existed. And the reactions came in like little affirmations. You deserve better. This is wild. I'm so sorry you deal with this. Still, I stayed quiet in the group chat. I let them argue, defend, excuse, accuse, all of it playing out like a tragicomic stage performance where the audience already knew the ending, but the actors kept delivering their lines as if surprise was still possible. Eventually, the tone shifted, not to remorse, but to offense. Nina, perhaps realizing that silence is more powerful than any insult, finally snapped. You know, if you've got something to say, just say it instead of playing these games. Games. As if the real game wasn't the years I spent showing up for them, remembering every birthday, sending thoughtful gifts, comforting them during breakups and layoffs and fights and funerals, only to be forgotten like a background character in the story of their lives. As if silence wasn't the last tool I had left that didn't involve shouting. Then came the voicemail. My father, his voice trembling in that carefully curated tone that lives somewhere between disappointed and victimized. James, son, I don't know what's going on with you, but this isn't like you. I just feel like you're punishing us for something we didn't even do. We love you. We just didn't realize. Is that really a crime? And I sat there in a hotel robe that smelled faintly of lavender and sea salt thinking, no, Dad. Forgetting isn't a crime, but expecting me to keep pretending it doesn't matter? That's the real punishment. And I'm not the one handing it out anymore. I didn't return his call. I didn't text back. I just opened the sliding door to the balcony, stepped out into the Miami night air, and let the sound of the waves drown out the noise of people who only realized I was gone because for once, I didn't beg them to notice me. The first thing I noticed about my father's voicemail wasn't the words he used, but the calculated tone underneath them, that fragile warbly edge he perfected over the years. A performance wrapped in the illusion of concern, carefully constructed to sound like vulnerability, but hollow enough that if you pushed even slightly, it cracked and revealed the sharpness beneath. He started with, hey, son, the kind of greeting he only used when he needed something or when he knew he was in the wrong, but refused to admit it outright. A tonal olive branch dipped in guilt. His voice was quieter than usual, like he wanted to sound like he was alone in a room full of people. The kind of quiet that demands attention. The kind that says, I'm hurting, and it's your job to fix it. I don't understand what's happening, son, he said, dragging the silence between phrases like it might fill the gaps of his memory, the ones where my birthday used to be. You didn't tell anyone it was your birthday, and now it feels like you're trying to make a point, and I don't know why. He paused there long enough for me to imagine him looking out the window or maybe waiting to see if I'd pick up halfway through the recording like I used to when I was younger and desperate for approval, but I didn't. Not this time. I mean, if you're upset, why didn't you just say something? He continued, his voice softening in a way that made my stomach turn because I knew that softness. I'd lived under it for decades, and it always came right before the accusation. I'm not a mind reader, James, and you know that. We've all been busy. Nina's been traveling, and Lance has been sick, and your mother. He trailed off like he always did when he needed to imply struggle without providing specifics, as if the implication alone should excuse everything. Anyway, we were going to do something next week. We didn't forget. Not really. Not really. Those 2 words caught in my chest like a splinter. Not really as in it doesn't count because you meant well. Not really as in forgetting only matters if you admit it. I paused the message right there because I could already hear the next line forming in my head before he even said it. The part where I became the problem, where my reaction, not their inaction, took center stage. I had heard that speech before in different forms, in different tones, on different occasions, birthdays, holidays, graduations, even the day I signed the lease on my first apartment and invited them over for dinner, only to be told last minute that Nina had something come up, and Lance had a headache, and my parents didn't want to drive all the way into the city just for a plate of pasta. That was the night I learned that effort, when coming from me, was always optional for them to acknowledge, that my milestones were somehow less urgent, less valid, less real. That night, I poured a second glass of wine, ate the dinner I had cooked for 4 by myself, and told myself it didn't matter, but it did. It always did. I resumed the voicemail. "I just think it's a little cruel what you're doing," my father said. And there it was, the turn, the softness evaporating, the real message emerging like a blade hidden in a bouquet. Posting photos like that, knowing we'd see them and feel bad. James, come on. That's not you. That's not who you are. And that was when I felt something inside me go still. Because he was right, it wasn't who I used to be. I was always the peacemaker, the forgiver, the one who smoothed over the awkward silences and made sure everyone felt included even when I didn't. I used to bend so far backward to avoid conflict that I forgot what standing upright felt like, but not anymore. I didn't respond to his message. I didn't even delete it. I just left it there sitting in my voicemail box like a tiny relic of a war I was no longer fighting, a ghost from a house I had already left. And then I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years, my 16th birthday, the one where they threw Nina a surprise graduation party 2 days before and acted so exhausted from planning that they just needed a break, which somehow meant my birthday dinner became a casual night in. I wore a new shirt that night, one I had saved up for with lawn mowing money, thinking it would make the evening feel more special, and I made my own cake because my father said the bakery was closed on Sundays. I remember sitting there, listening to everyone talk about Nina's college plans, the music too loud, the TV still on in the background, and no one ever actually said the words happy birthday, not even once. I should have said something. I should have spoken up then, but I didn't. I smiled. I cleaned up. I told myself they were tired and busy and not really forgetful, just overwhelmed, and I believed it because I wanted to. But now listening to that voicemail, staring at the bright Miami sky through the open hotel curtains, I finally saw it for what it was. Not a one-time mistake, not a fluke, not an unfortunate oversight, but a pattern, deliberate through indifference, maintained through guilt, and wrapped in just enough false warmth to keep me questioning my own instincts. I opened my messages, scrolled down to my father's latest text, and typed a reply that felt like both a release and a revelation. "You didn't forget me. You just didn't think it mattered. I stopped reminding you to see if that was true. Turns out it was." I hit send, and then I posted it. No photo, no tags, just the text. It wasn't for them. It was for every version of myself that had swallowed disappointment and called it maturity. For every time I had downplayed the sting of being invisible. For every moment, I had mistaken silence for strength. It was a truth that demanded no justification, no apology, no room for argument. Because the real cruelty isn't in forgetting. It's in expecting the forgotten to act like it never happened. There is a very particular kind of silence that fills a room after you've said something you can't take back. Not the kind that screams or slams doors or erupts into chaos, but the kind that sits still and heavy like smoke after a fire that burned longer than it should have and left behind nothing recognizable. That's the kind of silence I woke up to the next morning, the kind that doesn't ask questions or demand answers because everything that needed to be said had already been written in the space between words, in the tone, in the timing, in the absence of the usual half-hearted responses. No one texted back. No one called. No fire emojis. No overcompensating gifs of balloons or belated messages pretending they'd meant to say something earlier. There was just quiet. And for the first time, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. The sky outside my hotel window was a softer shade of blue than it had been the day before, as if even the weather understood that something had shifted, not in them, but in me. I had spent years, decades really, trying to figure out how to be the kind of son, brother, person who didn't make waves, who didn't demand too much, who didn't make anyone uncomfortable with his needs or his disappointment. I'd been trained without anyone ever saying it out loud to make myself smaller, not because anyone told me I had to, but because every time I took up space, it was met with silence or worse with guilt. And now here I was sitting on a hotel bed in a city where no one knew my name, feeling more seen than I ever had in my own house. The last message I received was from my father, and it came not as a text, not as a voicemail, but as a reply to my post. The one where I told the truth, plain and unpolished, without wrapping it in pleasantries or softening it to make it easier to swallow. He didn't comment publicly, of course. That would have required a level of vulnerability he wasn't capable of, not when it came to appearances. Instead, he sent me a message that read, "We can't believe you'd throw us away over a dinner." Over a dinner. As if the table, the cake, the candles, the toast, the things I never got were what mattered. As if this entire fracture could be reduced to one meal missed, one night overlooked, one simple oversight rather than the culmination of years of emotional neglect that had been neatly dressed in family photos and polite phone calls and holiday gatherings where I always ended up in the kitchen cleaning up after everyone else. As if I hadn't spent my entire adult life carrying the weight of other people's convenience. I didn't reply right away because I needed to sit with the anger and the grief and the unexpected sense of relief that came from finally being misunderstood on my own terms. I let the silence speak for me a little longer, not because I was trying to be cruel, but because for once, I wasn't trying to be anything. I was just existing without apology, and that in and of itself was revolutionary. The Miami sun was setting through my hotel window, casting long shadows across the marble floor, and I found myself thinking about all the birthdays that had come before this one. The pattern hadn't always been so clear, so obvious in its cruelty. When I was younger, maybe 8 or 9, my birthdays had been modest but acknowledged. Nothing extravagant, but there would be a cake, a small gathering, Maybe a toy I'd been wanting. I remember one year getting a baseball glove that I treasured for months, practicing my catch in the backyard until the leather was soft and worn. But somewhere along the way, as Nina got older and her achievements became more spectacular, more worthy of attention, my birthdays started shrinking. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. Just little things. The cake becoming store-bought instead of homemade. The gifts becoming more practical, less thoughtful. The celebrations getting shorter, more rushed, like an obligation that needed to be checked off a list rather than a moment worth savoring. I remember my 14th birthday particularly clearly. Nina had just gotten accepted to a prestigious summer program, something that required my parents to drive 3 hours each way for an interview and orientation that weekend. My birthday fell right in the middle of it, and instead of postponing the trip or celebrating early, they simply forgot. When they returned on Sunday night, exhausted and talking nonstop about Nina's opportunities, my father noticed the calendar and said, "Oh, wasn't your birthday yesterday?" Not an apology, not an explanation, just a casual observation, like he'd noticed the weather. That was the first time I felt truly invisible in my own home. Not because they were mean or deliberately cruel, but because I had become so much background noise in the symphony of Nina's success. And instead of speaking up, instead of demanding the attention I deserved, I learned to make myself smaller, to need less, to expect nothing so I wouldn't be disappointed. The hotel room service menu was still sitting on the nightstand from the previous evening, and I found myself staring at it, thinking about all the birthday dinners I'd eaten alone over the years. Not just the forgotten ones, but the ones where I was physically present but emotionally absent, sitting at tables surrounded by family who talked over me, around me, through me, but never really to me. How many times had I sat at those dinners feeling like a guest at my own party, grateful just to be included in conversations that had nothing to do with me. There was my 21st birthday, when we went to a restaurant that Nina picked because she was vegetarian that month, and I spent the evening eating overpriced salad while listening to her explain her new philosophy about sustainable living to our parents, who hung on every word like she was delivering the Sermon on the Mount. I ordered a beer, my first legal drink, and no one even noticed. The waiter asked if it was a special occasion, and before I could answer, my father jumped in to tell him about Nina's internship at an environmental nonprofit. Or my 28th, when Lance had just proposed to Nina, and the entire dinner became an impromptu engagement party. My birthday cake was forgotten in favor of champagne toasts and wedding planning conversations that would continue for the next 18 months. I sat there, watching my sister's happiness eclipse my existence once again, and when the check came, I was the one who ended up paying because everyone was so distracted by ring shopping and venue discussions. The pattern was so established, so normalized, that I started to think maybe this was just how families worked. Maybe some people were meant to be the center of attention, and others were meant to orbit around them, providing support and stability and unconditional love without expecting much in return. Maybe I was just naturally suited to be the background character in everyone else's story. But sitting in that Miami hotel room, with the evidence of my family's indifference spelled out in black and white on my phone screen, I realized how wrong I'd been. It wasn't natural or normal or inevitable. It was a choice they made, again and again, to prioritize other things, other people, other moments over acknowledging my existence. And more importantly, it was a choice I'd made to let them. I thought about my friend Marcus, who had thrown me a surprise party 3 years ago when I mentioned offhandedly that I didn't usually do much for my birthday. He'd invited a dozen people, rented out a private room at a bar, and even made a speech about what a good friend I was. I'd been so moved, so overwhelmed by the gesture, that I'd almost cried. Not because the party was elaborate or expensive, but because someone had thought I was worth celebrating. Someone had remembered, had planned, had cared enough to make an effort. That night, Marcus had pulled me aside and said something that stuck with me. "You know, you never talk about your family celebrating you. That's weird, right?" At the time, I'd laughed it off, made some joke about being low maintenance, but his words had planted a seed of doubt that had been growing ever since. Because he was right. It was weird. Not quirky or modest or admirable, but genuinely strange that a grown man couldn't count on his own family to remember the day he was born. The more I thought about it, the more examples came flooding back. High school graduation, where Nina's speech as valedictorian overshadowed my own achievement of making it through 4 years without any major disasters. College graduation, where my parents spent most of the ceremony talking about Nina's engagement planning. My first promotion at work, which I'd excitedly called to share, only to be told that Nina was also getting a promotion and wasn't that such a coincidence. Even my heartbreak, when my long-term girlfriend Sarah left me for someone else, had been minimized because Nina was planning her wedding and didn't want negative energy around such a joyful time. I pulled out my laptop and started scrolling through old photos on social media, looking for evidence of my own existence in my family's digital history. What I found was telling. Hundreds of photos of Nina at various life events, beaming with my parents, celebrating everything from her college acceptance to her first apartment to her wedding day. And scattered throughout, like afterthoughts, were a few pictures of me. Usually in the background, often looking uncomfortable, sometimes clearly cropped from larger family gatherings where I'd been positioned at the edge of the frame. There was one photo that particularly stung, from last Christmas. Nina, Lance, and my parents were gathered around their beautifully decorated tree, all smiles and matching sweaters, while I was barely visible in the corner, having arrived late from work and still wearing my business casual clothes. The caption read, "Perfect family Christmas with our favorite people." As if I wasn't technically family, or perhaps not quite favored enough to merit inclusion in the sentiment. But what really struck me was what wasn't there. No photos of my college graduation. No pictures from my promotion celebration. No documentation of my achievements, my milestones, my moments of joy or sorrow. I existed in their digital world only as supporting cast, background decoration for the real stars of the family show. The realization should have hurt more than it did, but instead, I felt a strange sense of liberation. Because seeing it all laid out like that, the pattern of neglect so clear and undeniable, meant I could stop pretending it was in my head. I could stop making excuses for them, stop telling myself that love comes in different forms, stop convincing myself that their indifference was somehow my fault for not being interesting enough, successful enough, demanding enough. I closed the laptop and walked back out to the balcony, where the Miami skyline was beginning to twinkle with evening lights. Somewhere out there were families celebrating each other, remembering important dates, making their loved ones feel seen and valued. And somewhere back in Illinois, my family was probably going about their evening routines, completely unaware that their silence was speaking louder than any argument ever could. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I felt completely at peace with disappointing them. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I finally understood that their disappointment in me was nothing compared to my disappointment in myself for accepting so little for so long. Eventually, I typed out a response. Not long, not dramatic, but clear. It was never about the dinner. And then I turned off my phone, not because I was afraid of what they'd say next, but because I genuinely didn't care anymore. I didn't need the last word. I didn't need validation. I had given myself something that no one in my family had ever truly offered: permission. Permission to celebrate myself without waiting for others to do it first. Permission to draw boundaries and keep them even when they made other people uncomfortable. Permission to be angry and hurt and whole. Permission to walk away, not in rage, but in clarity. I checked out of the hotel that afternoon, the ocean breeze brushing against my skin like a benediction, the doorman tipping his hat with a smile that felt more genuine than half the birthday cards I'd received in my life. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Everything I'd left behind, the years of biting my tongue, the birthday calls that came 2 days late, the guilt-laced hugs, and the apologies wrapped in conditions could stay where it belonged in the past. As the Uber pulled away, I opened my travel app and started browsing for my next trip. I wasn't running away. I wasn't trying to make another point. I was simply done waiting for anyone else to give me permission to live the way I wanted. I had spent too long contorting myself into something palatable, digestible, easy. And this year, this birthday, was the first time I realized I didn't have to do that anymore. Next year, I'm thinking Paris. Not because it's far or expensive or glamorous, though it's all of those things, but because I want to sip wine on a rooftop and watch the sunset over the Seine without once checking my phone to see if anyone remembered me. I want to walk through streets lined with history and strangers and feel for just a few moments like the world is wide open, like I am not defined by anyone's ability to celebrate me or forget me. And maybe, just maybe, I'll keep the location to myself again, not as revenge, not as a test, but because sometimes freedom is found in the places we go alone, the ones we don't share, the ones we don't post about, the ones that belong only to us. That's the thing about being forgotten. Once you stop fearing it, once you realize you can survive it, maybe even thrive in it, you start to understand that the loudest statement you can ever make is choosing yourself without asking permission.